Are you looking to write a resume for a remote job? With the rise of remote work, it's essential to know how to create a winning resume that stands out to potential employers. In this recording of a previous FlexJobs webinar, our career expert shares valuable insights on crafting a resume specifically for remote work. From highlighting your remote work experience to showcasing your virtual collaboration skills, you'll learn how to optimize your resume for remote job applications. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of writing a standout resume for remote work.
All right, so let's talk about what employers are looking for. All right, so if we look at previous experience, employers will look for previous remote or flexible work experience. And we're gonna talk later about how you can include that and where you should include that on your resume. That's in the how to do it section. But the question is, do you have any previous remote work experience and just don't realize it? So previous work experience that's remote includes working from home, maybe occasionally or all of the time, of course. It can also be experiences such as working across time zones or doing some digital collaboration or using those tools within an office team. So maybe you have an organization that you work in and you guys have meetings, but those meetings take place on a digital platform like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something like that. Even though you're all in the office, that counts as some remote time. It doesn't have to be a formalized situation. So even casual remote work counts. So let's get your gears turning. As you're hearing me and talking about that many different things can count as remote work, is there anyone out there that has remote experience that came to mind that you hadn't thought of before? And you can add that to the chat if you want to. It's always fun to see what other people come up with or realize after just talking about this briefly. On our team, we find that many job seekers that we've worked with in the past have actually more remote or hybrid experience than they realized. And this is something that is really enlightening to think about and to talk about and really to take and enhance your resume when you are applying to these types of jobs. So think about if you bring project work home on a regular basis, if you communicate via telephone, email, or instant messaging with people like coworkers, clients, vendors who are outside of the office, if you work out of your car a lot of the time, are you an independent contractor or maybe a freelancer? Or maybe you're a teacher, and those of you who are teachers know that you spend many evenings and weekends grading assignments and exams. This and more does count as remote work, and it should be highlighted within your resume. Here's the important question to ask. For any potential experience, would you be able to talk to an employer about how you were productive and effective in that remote work arrangement? And if you can do that, if the answer to that question is yes, it counts. All right. If you truly don't have any remote experience, that's a-okay. Let's talk about all the great skills you might already have to be a productive and effective remote worker so you can shape this conversation. When FlexJobs surveys employers, they consistently say that these skills are really important for flexible professionals to demonstrate. This is what helps make successful remote and hybrid teams. The first skill on the left, verbal and written communication, may be the most important or one of them. Verbal communication skills, really, it's your ability to share ideas and information in a clear and concise way, leaving no room for misunderstanding. So it's clear, direct communication. You need the ability to communicate effectively and efficiently so whomever you are communicating with really understands what your messaging is. Writing is, of course, a communication method as well. And while writing may not be the primary task of every job, given the nature of businesses today, writing skills have become an essential element of most careers, particularly when working remotely. Employees with effective written communication skills can convey messages and information clearly despite the lack of visual cues. And oftentimes in a remote environment, unless you are on video every day, all day, you are not going to have those same visual cues. And so the tone and the way that you communicate in written form is critical. Time and task management. Working remotely can provide employees with I guess you could call it a newfound sense of freedom and flexibility, not really just like in how you work, but also where you do your work. But many of the distractions you faced as an in-person worker can transfer and creep into your workday when you work at home. They might just be different distractions. So instead of people popping by your desk all day, it might be the doorbell rings or the laundry dryer buzzes or something along those lines. And remote employers really know this. They want to know that you have systems in place to keep yourself on track. And not only that, when you are interviewed for a remote job, they are going to ask you what those systems are. Here's another subset of communication, being proactive and asking questions. So you cannot be afraid to ask questions and to work towards more clarity when you work remotely. It is vital to achieve a successful career within this type of environment. Working within remote spaces does have some limitations, such as not having your supervisor or coworker stopping by your office and seeing your nonverbal cues, right? We already talked about that. So be sure to speak up when you have a question and also when you have a really good idea. Part of working remotely means that you are going to use technology. So you have to be comfortable with technology. You have to be familiar with digital communication tools, and you have to be willing to learn about them and navigate them. You may not be a technological wizard, and you don't have to be. It is, however, a great idea to know your way around the many software programs that businesses use. For any remote environment or remote company, being able to collaborate effectively on a remote team or a distributed team in this type of environment is a top priority. It's a requirement of all employees at the organizations. In a remote environment, you can imagine that collaboration requires extensive use of online and digital resources, which means getting comfortable with project management software or programs, video meeting software, and any company-specific digital platforms. A lot of companies, if they're big enough, will have their own internal, maybe like intranet that you might use to communicate with. So that will be something that is important for you to know and be comfortable with. Each company will have its own tools and process for getting work done and keeping employees engaged. It's important that you feel at ease and comfortable with learning and using new digital resources. I kind of gave away this next one a little bit by mentioning learning, but really having a growth mindset and embracing change and learning new things. That can happen in a digital environment, learning new tools, of course, but in a remote environment, when challenges or any setbacks do happen, you have to be able to sort of accept them, greet them with open arms, so to speak, which might not be our first inclination, but those people who come to remote work with a growth mindset believe that those situations and challenges are really an opportunity to learn and grow rather than a stopping point or a stumbling point. And finally, let's talk about problem solving and troubleshooting. Your problem solving skills can help with the previous skill that I just talked about, but it can also help you identify when and that there is a problem. It will also help you identify the cause of the problem and assist you in finding a way to implement a solution. Any employer will appreciate it when an employee identifies bottlenecks or inefficiencies in processes or procedures. However, they are even more appreciative when staff also offer solutions to those issues. So take a few seconds. I will give you a few seconds before I flip to the next slide to get some ideas. You can write them down if you want, or type them on a document on your computer on which skills you already have that sets you up to be productive working in a remote or hybrid environment. And feel free, if you are going to put this in the chat section, which you can, we invite you to do that if you're comfortable, feel free to include skills that you would like to work on. And I'll give everyone just a few seconds to participate if they'd like. Okay, so I have mentioned comfort with technology and digital communication platforms, but what does that mean? What specific tools do you need to know? We get asked that question a lot. And when it comes to digital communication skills, the good news is that these are skills that are easily buildable. The following skills are the most common programs and tools we see used by hybrid and remote employers and remote teams. Each offers you can find like a free version or a free trial. So what we suggest is looking at the different categories like instant messaging, video conferencing, file sharing, and virtual office environments. And if you aren't sure what type of work that you want to do, you can pick one or two in each category and start learning a little bit more about them. However, if you are a little bit further along in your job search process and you know the types of jobs you want to apply for, look through a handful of job postings and see what patterns you find, meaning does Slack get mentioned in all of the job postings that you read, or Zoom or Google Workspace? Does Yammer never get brought up, right? So that way you can prioritize the most commonly used technology tools or digital communication tools for the type of job that you are going for. All right, so you can take that approach as well. And then what you can do is enlist the help of family or friends, so you can have somebody to communicate with and practice using these tools. There are also, of course, great tutorials either on the platform's website or on places like YouTube for most of these programs. So be sure to really leverage the expansiveness of the internet when you are trying to learn some of these tools, because there is a lot of information out there to help you. All right, so let's talk about how you can update your resume for remote work opportunities. First and foremost, your resume should be updated specifically when applying to remote jobs. And actually, as a side note, if you don't know this already, which I know many of you do, your resume really needs to be updated for every job you apply for. Remote, hybrid, and otherwise, you will always update your resume before you submit it as an application. This slide is going to talk about or show you different ways that you can call out remote work experience you have. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's not about whether you have any previous remote work experience or not. You can think about potential experience that you are able to talk about if you were productive and effective in that type of arrangement, and that will count. So you can use those words like hybrid, remote, virtual to describe this way of working. All right, so let's go through the different resume sections and see what you can do. All right. Summaries. Sometimes this is called a summary of qualification. It might be a profile section, profile and key skills section. It is not an objective section, okay? So it's different than that. Resumes have really shifted away from the dated objective statement we used to place at the top of the document. This has been replaced with a summary and key skills section. This is really due to a couple of things: needing space to hit on the keywords and key terms and phrases that applicant tracking systems are looking for in each applicant, but it also provides an employer with the information they really want. So rather than letting the employer know what you want, what your objective is, it instead paints the picture pretty quickly of what you bring to the table and what you can offer the organization. So you can see specific remote-friendly skills and experiences underlined on the slides in the orange, red colors. So in the first summary, We've underlined written and verbal communications and management, managers, and local or remote teams. Written and verbal communication, we know, is a skill that remote employers are looking for, and managing remote teams would also be something valuable for an employer to know. In the second example, you can see that team effectiveness and productivity through communication, as well as 6 years experience working within remote and distributed environments, is highlighted. Those are ways that this person has told the employer that they have remote work experience and the skills that are important to remote employers. And finally, skilled at team collaboration while working independently in remote environments is one other way you can show some of your remote experience. This part of your resume can easily be updated each time you apply for a job based on the keywords and critical skills that are listed in the job description. Every resume after the summary section has the experience section. So in the experience section, of course, you're going to have your job title, the name of your company, and the dates of the jobs. And that's where you will have your accomplishments and resume bullets. But for purposes of this presentation, you can alert an employer or a hiring manager that you have remote or hybrid experience in this section. So you look at the first example. We have put in line with the job title that the faculty position was remote. We also listed that it was a virtual office. In the second example, a business consultant is usually somebody who works for themselves. They may be self-employed, and the person listed fully remote work underneath the dates. And finally, in the third example, there is a percentage, 20% of remote work listed. You also could replace that percentage with the word hybrid to show that it was hybrid work. Okay, so those are ways to include that within the job title and location headings for your resume bullets in your experience section or your job description section. So in that experience section, you also can call attention to your different resume experiences that you have. So highlight your remote experience within the descriptions of your current or earlier positions. And if we look at the examples, what you can see here is in the first example as a schedule and edit coordinator, that's a remote role, coordinate schedules and other comprehensive duties in a 100% remote environment with minimal supervision. Again, that is highlighting the remote work that you have, the ability to work independently, as saying with minimal supervision, and remote employers are excited about that. And in the second example, with a communications contractor, managed complex cross-functional projects from initial concepts to final project deliverables to achieve short and long-term objectives in a remote environment using outstanding communication and organizational skills. Okay, so what do we hear there? Communication and organizational skills, skills that remote employers are looking for. In the third example, in this fully remote executive assistant role, the bullet starts simply by saying worked remotely and independently while overseeing, and it goes on to describe that accomplishment. So again, being very clear that there is remote or hybrid experience is helpful for an employer to know. So don't be afraid to share that experience. There we go. All right. We talked about digital communication tools a little bit earlier. So why not then make sure that you get a technology skills section on your resume. So even if you don't have remote work experience, you know that you should focus on remote friendly skills. And also you now know and have a plan to put in place to embrace and learn new digital platforms. So having this skills section on your document is a great way to show employers that you are comfortable with technology and which programs you are familiar with. It also shows that you have an ability and an interest in growth and embracing learning by learning these tools. So as you learn more of the digital platforms or remote collaboration programs, like we mentioned earlier, add them to this section. Many of us have learned how to use video conferencing like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and others over the last couple of years. So feel free to include those as well. Even if you haven't used those systems in a paid work world, you can still add them to your resume if you are familiar with them and comfortable. So if you've had Zoom calls with your family and you've set those up or you've experienced the use of Zoom, you can add that to your resume, and then you can continue to practice those to be even more proficient and efficient with these platforms. Okay. It is important when you are applying to jobs to update your resume every time and edit it for the job you are applying for. And I talked about this earlier, but most employers today use what are called applicant tracking systems, or ATS. This is a database that lists each resume or each applicant, in the order that they were received. Companies use these systems in different ways. Sometimes recruiters and hiring managers will search using keywords for existing resumes for new positions that become available. And recruiters also rely heavily on the job posting language because they may not know all the specifics about every job they have vacant, because they might hire across different organizations within a company. So that's one of the reasons it's really important to customize your resume for each position you apply for, to hit on the specific wording for that job posting. And make sure, if you are going to include keywords from the job posting, that you actually also have those skills as well. Pay attention to that wording. What language are they using for remote? Do they use the word remote? Do they use virtual? Do they use telecommute? Okay. If the job posting says detail oriented, that's what your resume should say, not attention to detail. Is it verbal communication or oral communication? Companies list this differently, and you want to make sure that you match that on your resume as much as possible. And in terms of what your resume should look like, resumes and applicant tracking systems have difficulty reading information in headers and footers. Uncommon fonts or fancy fonts that have like italics, or they look like they're in cursive, and different shapes on bullets. So that should all be really simple. And your margin should not be smaller than 1/2 inch, and more common, it's usually 0.75 or even 1 for online applications. This can make it more time consuming for you to go back and fix your online application to ensure the correct information is inserted in the correct fields. However, it is important that you do it. When emailing your resume, consider that the recruiter or hiring manager may try to open it on a mobile device. And so one of the things that you can do is open your resume on your mobile device to see that it looks readable and presentable for somebody that might look at it in that format. All right, so let's put some of this into practice. I'm going to ask you if you're comfortable to use the chat section, but here is a sample portion of a contract editor job that was found on the FlexJobs site. What type of technology tools would be good to add to your resume if you were applying for this job? Okay, it looks like some answers have started to come in, and I see some of the ones that I would have selected too: Slack, Skype, Google Docs, SaaS, and Sales Tech. Very good. All right, next question. You have an opportunity to answer as well. What type of writing keywords would you want to include on your resume if you had the skills? Okay, we've got some stuff popping in as well for this one: sales, writing, editing, email marketing, technical copy, editorial, etc. Very good. Thank you guys for participating with that and reading through that with me. Here is a sample portion of an accountant job found on our site. Here's the question to answer this time. What type of technology tools would be good to add to your resume if you were applying to this job? Accounting, right? So this is something that might be a little bit different than the editing job. All right, QuickBooks, Microsoft Office, like Excel, Word, and Outlook. Good, 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 good. What other keywords do you notice or potential keywords do you notice in this listing? Take a few seconds and feel free to add to the chat before I go over them. All right, so it looks like associate's degree or bachelor's degree. Those are in bold. Accounting, GAAP, general accounting, debits and credits, purchase orders, inventory, reconciliations. Here are some soft skills: work independently, reliable, dedicated, attention to detail, organized, written and verbal communication. And let's see, staff accountant, is that on there? All right, very good. Other than technical tools, which would go into the technology section and the bachelor or associate's degree in the education section, these other keywords should be listed within your summary and key skills section, and then within or throughout your professional experience section where possible as well. All right, and before we wrap up and go into action steps, in the resources section included in big marker, we do have a list, or excuse me, a resource loaded that has a library of sample templates and scripts for resumes, cover letters, follow-ups, and other job search necessities. So if you want to click on the resources or handouts section in big marker, sometimes it's called different things, you can open that link and be connected to that. But we also will be sending this out in the email that we send with the recording. But if you don't want to wait, you can grab that now. All right, so what do you do now? How can you make sure that you are setting yourself up for success in your resume when you apply to jobs? First and foremost, make sure you know your remote friendly skills and experience. Learn and include digital communication tools on your resume. And you're going to make sure that your resume is updated not only with your remote experience, but those technology tools as well. And again, please know that it's very important to update and tailor your resume and cover letter each time you apply to a job, and keep the formatting on the document pretty simple. All right, without further ado, we're going to go into the questions in just a second. Reminder, put those in the Q&A section. But if you have any other questions or are looking for any additional information on your job search or in your career progression, please don't forget to check out the FlexJobs blog at flexjobs.com/blog. There is there are so many articles, over 4,000, on any topic that you can imagine for your job search. So it really is a great resource for you to go if you're stuck and need some advice. So head on over there and get that. And while you're doing that, I am going to head into the Q&A section. Let's go ahead and see what questions we have.
All right, everybody, we are going to move into our Q&A portion of today's webinar. Before we really get started there, could someone just confirm for me in the chat that you are able to hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. So my name is Keith Spencer, and I am one of our career experts here at FlexJobs, and I will be conducting the Q&A today. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. And if you see a question that you want to hear the answer of, make sure to click that thumbs up button so I know which questions are most popular. Okay, so let's dive right in. Our first question is regarding best practices to indicate career gaps. So I am a big proponent of addressing career gaps or breaks in employment head on, because if you don't include those in your professional experience section, sometimes the applicant tracking system might get a little confused if your dates aren't sort of chronological there, or reverse chronological, I should say, with the most recent first. Also, employers might start to imagine, concerns or red flags that don't actually exist. So I really recommend sort of proactively and tactfully addressing that career break in your professional experience section. Now, let me go ahead and share my screen here a second. So as was mentioned in the webinar, we do have a full list of samples, templates, scripts, etc. And within that are these examples of how you can list a career break or an employment gap on your resume. So you'll see, the formatting is very much like how you would have your other jobs listed within your professional experience section. And then, you can have some bullets, one or two bullets that are sort of explaining the reason for this career break. So, maybe you were laid off. You might say, one of multiple people laid off due to a change in company strategy. I actually saw another question that mentioned that they were laid off due to the pandemic. That happens to a lot of people. So, you could say one of many laid off due to the economic impact of the global pandemic, something like that. It's also really helpful to include a bullet point to show, especially if your career break has been, fairly lengthy, to show, what you may have been doing during that time to stay professionally active. Some people maybe just took a little bit of a break, especially if they were laid off. They needed to kind of, reorganize, get their thoughts together. They needed some time away from the workforce just to kind of get back to a good place, because layoffs are extremely difficult. If that was the case and you're not really sure what else to include in there, do keep in mind the fact that you are here in today's webinar shows that you are, taking the time to, develop and hone remote skills, remote working skills, or, it's never too late. Also, I should mention to start taking some courses or classes online. There are a lot of free options out there. Coursera is a really popular platform. Udemy is another one that's really popular, where you can find both paid and free classes that you could take. So, if you've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, you haven't started taking courses yet, start taking one this week. And then, you don't necessarily have to say, I just started taking courses. You could just say, also utilizing time to pursue courses in X, Y, and Z, or something like that. Or maybe you've been volunteering, you can include that in your career break as well. So any number of things that you'd sort of tactfully and proactively explain in your career break entry, address that break head on. Relocation is another one. Caregiving, a lot of good reasons why people leave the workforce for a specific amount of time. So that's how I would address a career break. Be proactive there, list it in your professional experience section, and then try to include some other information about some of the things you may have done or are doing to try to stay professionally active. Oh, another thing you could just mention, taking time to identify and research top remote organizations. That's another bullet point that you could throw in there. Basically, just trying to show that you are using your time in a an active and effective way. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. We'll go ahead and move on to our next question here. Okay, so we have a question about trying to avoid issues related to ageism. This person is saying that they have very relevant experience from earlier in their career, as it relates to the types of jobs they're applying to now. They do have an additional related experience section with no dates on their resume, but are concerned that maybe that looks even worse, or is that the correct approach to take? So I would argue that yes, that is the correct approach to take. And let me share my screen again here so we can look at specifically what you're talking about here. So again, this is in that full list of samples, templates, and scripts that's in your resources tab. These are resume samples. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe it's this one here. So this additional related experience section that this person mentioned looks like this. It's very much formatted, much like your professional experience section, but you would probably condense the description a little bit and not include the dates. So that is a good workaround for including some of that earlier experience that maybe is highly relevant to the types of jobs that you're applying for now. You want that on your resume so that employers see that you have that relevant experience, but you don't want to necessarily date yourself. This is a good way of kind of emphasizing, talent over age. And I would argue, the only way that that could potentially sort of be transparent, or as you mentioned in your question, make it seem worse, is if you extended your date range for your professional experience section beyond 15 years, or maybe I would recommend keeping that closer to the 10-year mark rather than 15 years. If your professional experience section, if you were going back here 20 years and then you also had additional related experience on top of that, people are going to see through that. They might, whether consciously or subconsciously, have some bias against, folks who have had a longer career. So that's the only way that it could potentially seem worse, to use your phrase there. But I think as long as you're keeping this, close to 10 years, or at the very least under 15 years in your professional experience section, there's no problem there, including that additional related experience section. Very good question there. Let me go ahead and get back to our Q&A. Okay, so we have another question. What style of resume is best for remote work, functional or chronological? So for those of you who don't know the difference between those two, a functional resume would be one where you're not necessarily listing your experiences in that reverse chronological order with the most recent first. You're just kind of putting the most relevant things at the top of your professional experience list. You're still including the dates, but your experiences might be a bit out of order because you're trying to emphasize those most relevant or applicable roles that you've had. Chronological, that's the reverse chronological, where you're listing everything with most recent first, going back about 10 to 15 years. I actually recommend, and once again, let me share my screen here. Let's go back to those resume samples. I actually recommend what is more of a hybrid version of that. So it's kind of a combination of that classic kind of chronological format and a functional resume. So if we skip down here to your professional experience section, you would still have those listed in reverse chronological order, going back about 10 to 15 years, like we said. But then you could also include a highlighted contributions, or maybe you call this a highlighted attributes, or highlighted achievement section, something like that, where you're kind of pulling in a mixture of some of those most relevant things that you did or accomplishments you achieved from your past roles, not in that chronological order, and just kind of prominently showcasing those. So this is more of a hybrid between that chronological and functional style of resume. Kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And actually, going back to that previous question with the additional related experience section, wanting to avoid issues related to ageism, excuse me, this is also something that you could do to help with those issues related to ageism if you didn't feel comfortable including that additional related experience section, or if you had some concerns about that section, being kind of buried a little bit farther down on your resume. This type of a section would give you that opportunity to, again, more prominently showcase that type of experience. So that good question about functional versus chronological, and it also applies here to, that ageism question, which was a good one earlier. Okay, stop sharing there and get back to our questions. Let's see. Okay, so a little bit of overlap here with one of the other questions that we had. Are dates of employment necessary? Have experiences that are pertinent or relevant, but will highlight my age. Just kind of reiterating there, you want to go back, or you do want to list your dates within that 10 to 15 year range of your most recent work. But then you could do that additional related experience section, or maybe a highlighted attribute section to emphasize some of that earlier experience without dating yourself. Again, emphasizing talent over age there. Let's see. Okay, so this person is talking about they worked in retail most recently, but most of their longer work history was in leadership administration. Two very different jobs. Should I still add it to my resume when I'm focusing on admin? So yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of times, maybe we decided to retire and then we want to come out of retirement, or maybe we were laid off and we just had sort of a different type of job for a couple of years while we were looking for something else. Or maybe you just needed a break from your previous industry and you worked in a different field, and now you're trying to get back into something that's more related to your previous work, but not necessarily relevant to the jobs you've had most recently. So a couple things you can do there. You could, if it has just been, a year or two, you could maybe list that as a career break, like we talked about earlier. But one of your bullets might say, also utilizing time to engage in some part-time, work in X, Y, and Z areas or something like that. You could just sort of mention it in passing. Other option is you could list that as your most recent work in your professional experience section, but make sure that you are focusing on the things that are going to be relevant. So, if we're thinking of, retail versus other industries, there's a lot of communication involved in retail. There's a lot of, working with others. So teamwork is really important. You need to have careful attention to detail. There might even be some de-escalation or conflict management involved if you have unhappy customers. Obviously, customer service, customer satisfaction, things like that. So I would focus on the things that are going to be relevant and transferable, not the things that aren't necessarily relevant. I'm going to piggyback off of that because I saw a couple other questions talking about, I have had, extensive experience. My resume is beyond 2 pages long. How do I shorten things down? Focus on what's relevant. If you are applying for a field that's similar to your own field, but maybe the job's a little bit different, you don't need to list every single task or responsibility that you've held in your previous roles. You can scale that back and focus on what's most relevant. In fact, what I do with my own job search, I have a master resume that lists every single task or responsibility I've held in every single past job that I've had. When I find jobs that I want to apply for, I make a copy of that master resume, and then I start pulling out the bullet points that aren't relevant. Or maybe I pull out things that are repetitive because I've had some jobs that have had similar responsibilities. You don't need to relist that same responsibility in another job below it just because that's something you did in that job. So, that's something that can help you, kind of focus on the things that are most relevant, are going to resonate with your audience most appropriately as it relates to that job. The biggest thing that you want to think about in resume writing, cover letter writing, even interviewing, is just think about your audience. What is going to matter to them? What is going to be relevant to them? And you find that out through the position description and through your research, about the organization. So always keep that in mind. Okay, so let's see. So this question's a little bit specific. I think this is the last one we'll have a chance for, but it's got some upvotes, so I do want to tackle this one. So you have an employment gap, but it was where you were doing consultancy or independent contractor work with your own company. Can you list that company of yours as your employer? So I believe you're saying you were self-employed as a consultant slash contractor, yes, absolutely. You can list self-employment on your resume, even if you weren't self-employed, like maybe you were just hired on as a contractor with your previous company because they changed your job status or something like that. You could still list it with that previous company, but maybe in parentheses next to your title, you could have contract role or something like that listed. But no, if you're self-employed doing consultancy or contracting, absolutely you can include that in your professional experience section. Maybe you don't have a name for your company, so you could just have your title as consultant, and then where you would normally put the employer name, you could just put like independent contractor, and then the location, fully remote or something like that. But yes, absolutely you can include that.